All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving into something pretty big. It's a brand new paper submitted to the World Health Organization, and it puts forward a really controversial theory about where SARS-CoV-2 actually came from. So was it a Wuhan wet market? Or, as this paper suggests, a U.S. research project gone wrong? The author, Jim Haslam, he's basically saying that the official story of a natural origin, well, he thinks it's completely wrong. He's pointing the finger squarely at a U.S.-led research project. So the core claim is this. The paper alleges the virus was actually a model bat vaccine that accidentally leaked from a lab in Wuhan while it was being tested. Now, our job here is to walk you through the author's argument step by step. We're going to stay neutral and just lay out the evidence he presents in his paper. Okay, let's get into it.
Okay, so here's our game plan for breaking down this really complex theory. We're going to look at the bat vaccine idea, the virus's blueprint, the animal models, the leak, an alleged cover-up, and finally, the call for an investigation. Let's start at the top.
All right, first up, the central premise of this whole thing. What is it? Well, the paper's core claim is that SARS-CoV-2 wasn't some random virus that jumped from an animal to a human. Instead, the author argues it was intentionally created as part of a U.S. project to develop a bat vaccine.
So, according to the paper, the goal here was, well, it's pretty ambitious. The idea was to vaccinate Chinese horseshoe bats to stop them from passing viruses to humans, specifically to protect U.S. military personnel in the area. The author claims the main work happened in two U.S. labs, the University of North Carolina, UNC, and Rocky Mountain Labs, or RML. And get this, the paper alleges that the funding came from the NIH, even after a similar proposal, called Diffuse, was shot down by DARPA. Okay, now we're going to get into the really nitty-gritty stuff. The author calls it the virus's molecular blueprint, basically the genetic fingerprints. And yeah, this is where things get a little technical, but stick with me, because it's fascinating. So, the author zooms in on one very specific, and let me tell you, very hotly debated feature of the virus. It's called the furin cleavage site, or FCS. You can think of it like a master key that lets the virus just waltz right into our human cells, which is what makes it so darn infectious. And the paper argues this little site, it's the smoking gun. And here's where it gets really interesting. Take a look at this comparison. The closest known relative in bats, a virus called RAW-TG13, it doesn't have this furin cleavage site at all. But SARS-CoV-2, it has this extra little piece of genetic code, this PRRA insert, that just kind of appears. It creates that cleavage site literally out of thin air. For the author, this is a massive red flag for genetic engineering.
So based on that genetic clue, the paper lays out this alleged creation and transfer process. Step 1. It was designed at UNC by Professor Ralph Baric, who allegedly inserted that furin cleavage site. Step 2, it was sent over to Rocky Mountain Labs to be aerosolized, to make it transmissible through the air. And step 3, it was then shipped all the way to the Wuhan Institute of Virology for testing on Chinese bats. And according to this theory, that's the model vaccine that ultimately leaked.
Okay, so we've talked genetics. Now, the author completely switches gears and looks at a different trail of breadcrumbs: animal transmission. The whole idea here is that if you look at which animals the virus spreads in most easily, it can tell you a lot about its history.
And this is a really striking claim. A lot of the early theories focused on animals you might find at a Wuhan market, like raccoon dogs. But this paper argues that if you look at the actual data, out of 5,000 mammal species, only these 5, Egyptian fruit bats, Syrian golden hamsters, American mink, American deer mice, and North American white-tailed deer, showed really efficient transmission of that original virus strain. We're not just talking about getting infected, we're talking about spreading it easily to each other.
And this table really drives the author's point home. These 5 species are all New World animals. And here's the kicker. According to the paper, none of them are native to China. Not one. But all 5 are supposedly common in U.S. labs, especially the kind of labs doing research on transmissible vaccines. So you can see the argument building, right? The author is suggesting this points away from a market in China and directly toward a lab in the U.S. Okay, so with that genetic and animal evidence on the table, the story now jumps to the very beginning of the pandemic. We're talking those chaotic, critical days in January and February of 2020. And at the center of it all is a pivotal and supposedly secret conference call between some of the world's top virologists. This timeline, according to the paper, is absolutely crucial. So on January 10th, the SARS-CoV-2 genome goes public. But the real moment, the paper claims, is January 24th. That's when the genome for rat RT13, that close bat relative, gets uploaded. Suddenly, scientists can compare the two side by side. And that's when they see that weird PRRA insertion. A week later, one scientist, Christian Andersen, emails Dr. Fauci saying, hey, this thing looks, well, it doesn't look like it evolved naturally. And boom, the very next day, that secret teleconference is convened.
And this is where we get to probably the most explosive accusation in the entire paper. The claim is that what happened after that secret call wasn't a search for the truth. It was a coordinated cover-up, an effort to hide the possibility that this virus came from a lab. As evidence, the author points to this Slack message from Christian Andersen. Remember, he's the guy who first emailed Dr. Fauci. Just a couple of days after that big call, he's writing to a colleague and says, I should mention that Ralph Baric pretty much attacked me on the call, essentially calling anything related to potential lab escape ludicrous, crackpot theories. And Ralph Baric is, of course, a key figure in this whole theory. So it's a pretty tense situation.
So you have that private, heated debate, and then the paper contrasts it with a public statement. About a month later, in an email to biodefense officials, Baric says, no, there is absolutely no evidence of genetic engineering. The paper presents this as a complete public reversal, a move that would go on to shape the entire public conversation. So where did this all lead? The paper alleges that Dr. Fauci himself prompted the creation of a now famous scientific paper called The Proximal Origin of SARS-CoV-2. This paper became the go-to document for the natural origin theory. The author's claim is that it was intentionally crafted to shut down the lab leak conversation before it could even get started.
So after laying all this out, the paper doesn't actually say case closed. It doesn't claim to have definitive proof. Instead, it ends with a very direct call for investigation, laying out a list of specific demands that, in the author's view, could either prove or completely debunk this whole theory once and for all. The author is basically saying, look, the truth is sitting in files that nobody has seen. They're demanding the release of Ralph Baric's emails and lab records. They want to see Vincent Munster's animal data from Rocky Mountain Labs. They're asking for the lab notebooks from a scientist who was at the Wuhan BSL-4. And they want a full explanation of Dr. Fauci's role, plus a review of all the agreements for shipping these viral samples around. The logic is pretty simple. If there's nothing to hide, release the documents and clear your name. If there is, well, the documents will show that too.
So will the records that could settle this whole debate once and for all ever be made public? The paper we've just walked through presents one incredibly detailed and, yes, deeply controversial theory. But what it really throws into sharp relief is this. Without total transparency from all the institutions involved, both in the US and in China, the real story of where SARS-CoV-2 came from might just stay locked away as one of the biggest, most consequential mysteries of our lifetime.